Well, welcome everybody to this virtual public meeting for the upcoming revision to flood maps for Sanderson Gulch, Harvard Gulch, and Dry Gulch. You know, this may not be the most exciting topic. We understand that. We live and breathe this stuff every day, so we're a little biased, but we do hope that you gain something from this, and we believe this is a very important topic. So much so that we actually have every level of government involved in this project, from local, regional, state, and federal levels. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody on the team, and you'll note that when we're talking, our names will be below our video on the Zoom call, so you can put a face to the name. My name is Jeremy Hamer. I am the Floodplain Administrator for the City and County of Denver. Joining me today are our resident floodplain experts, David Morrissey and David Bowles. They're going to be helping out in the chat, and they've already been putting some messages in the chat, but just wanted to remind the attendees that we really would appreciate and welcome any questions or comments in the chat. We have people here to help with that stuff, so feel free to use those tools. We also have the Colorado Water Conservation Board, Doug Mahan as a partner, and the consultant team of Compass, John Pink and James Johnston are here, and they're really the subject matter experts, the technical experts, preparing the revised mapping and helping out with some of the tools, and they'll show you a little bit of that later. You already heard from James from Community Engagement and Risk Communications, and we also have our federal partners, Fema Region 8, located out at the Federal Center in Lakewood, Chris Gaines and Diana Herrera, who will talk to flood insurance a little bit later. And last but not least, our partners at the Mile High Flood District, Shay Thomas, the Engineering Services Manager, and Stacy Thompson, the newly appointed Floodplain Manager for the Mile High Flood District. I did just want to give a shout out to all our partners that have been working through this process. We really appreciate it on behalf of the City and County of Denver. This is no small undertaking to remap entire drainage ways. So just appreciate all of the partnership and the collaboration that it takes to do this. And with that, I think we're going to move on to our first poll. So we encourage everybody to answer the poll. We want to hear from you about how you found out about this meeting. So go ahead and check a box that applies here, and then we'll kick things off. And I'll go ahead and remind everybody again, please feel free to use the chat or question and answer tools so we can assist.
We'll give it just about 10 more seconds here, Jeremy, before we
All right, great.
show the results.
Yeah, I see some familiar names in the attendees list, so appreciate you guys joining us today. We've had conversations with some of you folks already, so. All right, interesting. A few Twitter, or one Twitter, and mostly postcards, so that's good. All right, I'll go ahead and kick it over to Stacy with the Mile High Flood District to kick things off here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. Can everyone hear me okay?
Good.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yep, so thanks for the introduction, Jeremy. My name is Stacy Thompson, and I'm the Floodplain Manager with the Mile High Flood District. And I'm kind of starting off our presentation for the group, and just want to start out with, why is flood risk important? Flood risk changes over time. It isn't static. Flood hazards present a serious risk to life, health, safety, and property. And no matter where you live or work, some risk of flooding exists. And the goals of this physical map revision project for Harvard Gulch, Dry Gulch, and Sanderson Gulch are, one, to update the flood maps using best available data and technology, to best represent the actual flood risk, and 2, to make those who have high risk aware of their risk to be able to take action to protect their homes or business. And this presentation is intended to answer your questions and common questions and provide you with contact information to get more information. And then a couple of these photos on the slide are from June 2015 storm. So flooding does in fact happen in these watersheds. Next slide, please. So why are we here? This meeting is important because your level of flood risk may have changed, and this is an opportunity for you to learn more about the preliminary maps, flood zones, flood insurance, and what you can do to mitigate your risk. And we're going to have our second poll question. So just to better understand our audience, we would like to know what group you are representing. If you're a property owner, elected official, insurance agent, realtor, or agency staff. And as David just noted in the chat, please feel free to enter any questions you have in the chat box, and we'll try to answer as we go. If not, we'll save them for the end. So the majority of you are property owners, so well, thank you for attending. Next slide, please, James. Thank you. So we have a short agenda. So we intend to cover the project background and a look ahead. We'll talk about flood hazards in the National Flood Insurance Program, flood insurance, appealing the maps, as well as local construction requirements and risk reduction. We do have a number of handouts that are available on our project website. The website link will be posted in the chat. And we do want to highlight that the handouts are available in both English and Spanish. Next slide, please. Thanks. So who develops the flood hazard studies? The flood hazard studies are produced by the Mile High Flood District. They are local studies that are developed at the request of our local governments and in cooperation with our local partners. The current FEMA maps for Harvard Gulch, Dry Gulch, and Sanderson Gulch are based on flood studies produced 40 years ago. So the updated flood hazard studies are intended to capture changes that have impacted existing floodplains using best available data and technology to best represent the actual flood risk. And the steps shown on this slide represent the approval process between the Mile High Flood District and the state coordinating agency, which is the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And the goal is to incorporate the local flood hazard studies into the FEMA mapping products. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the FEMA process to update the flood insurance rate maps that we refer to as firms. We're currently in between the first and second step and anticipate the 90-day public appeal period to begin this summer. Next slide, please. And so this is a little bit more of a detailed timeline. And FEMA issued the preliminary maps in October of last year. And we're conducting the outreach for the preliminary maps now, which is the We Are Here spot. We expect the appeal period to begin in this summer, as I just mentioned. And after the appeal period ends and any appeals are resolved, FEMA will issue the maps as final through a letter of final determination, which is what LFD stands for. And we will conduct additional outreach at that time ahead of the maps becoming effective. We do anticipate the effective date to be fall of 2022. And once the maps are effective, insurance may become mandatory for some. So as we've mentioned, everyone has some flood risk. It's just a question of whether your home or business is in a high risk, moderate risk, or low risk flood area. This is an image from a flood insurance rate map. The high-risk areas, also referred to as the 100-year floodplain, are shown in blue, and they consist of the A zones. It could be A, AE, AH, or AO. The moderate risk areas, also referred to as the 500-year floodplain, are shown in orange. And then all of the areas shown in white represent the low risk areas. And it's really important to understand that this does not mean no risk, it's just lower risk. And the mandatory flood insurance requirements apply to the high risk flood zones. And again, those are the areas shown in blue, or the area that's labeled as floodway with the cross hatching area. And I think we're going to do another poll. So we'd like to hear from you to see if you know what your current flood zone is. And again, the zone AE, AO, and or AH, those are the high risk zones, and the zone X is the low risk zone. Well, that's a good mix. We do have a number of those that are unsure, and so hopefully we can help answer your questions in future slides. And with that, I'll turn it over to James so he can show you how to view your property and find your flood zone.
Thank you. Hi. This is James. So actually, I'm going to show you or talk to you briefly about the changes since last firm layer. This is a layer that is developed to help you navigate the changes, as it's called in the title, since the previous data was released. You can use this data set for a lot of things, and it's on a viewer that we're going to show you in a little bit. We're going to show you how to access that. And it is helpful for notifying the public of floodplain and flood zone changes. Obviously, it allows you to look at what the previous mapping was right next to what the current mapping is. You can use it to inform development decisions and community planning, or determine where mitigation or outreach might be needed. And it's also helpful on the insurance side for agents to contact insurance holders with changes to premiums and things like that. So that's going to be available on the tool that we'll show you in a bit. And if you go to the next slide, this is a slide that's showing you where you can get the data that we've just recently published. It's on the Fema web map or map service center. That link down there at the bottom is how you get to this page. And it's important to go to this page because if you have multiple recent releases of data and you went to the standard MSC site, it's not sorted as cleanly. So this sorts exactly your data set that was just issued. And so when you go this, if you had more than one data set, you can toggle it at the top there, and you'll see the listing of only the panels, the flood insurance study, and the database that were just released for this particular study. I think that's all I have on those two slides, and pass it back over to Fema.
Thank you, everybody. And I'm glad you've joined us tonight to learn a little bit about what the flood risk is going to be or is changing. So one of the things that we like to portray when it comes to map revisions is knowing what the risk is, identifying the flood risk for each and every property owner that's out there, so that you can make informed decisions about what you need to do in order to protect that risk. So flood risk changes over time, and they change for a variety of reasons. Development, drainage projects, road projects. If you live in the mountains, you know, fires will change the flood risk. So they change for a number of reasons. And our job at FEMA is to identify what that flood risk and make sure that we communicate that flood risk to property owners. So everyone lives in some flood risk, regardless of the flood zone. We've got our high risk flood zone, we've got our low risk, and then we've got a moderate flood zone that's somewhere in between. And in more than 30% of our flood insurance claims are coming now from outside of the high risk flood zones. If you have, one of the statistics we have out there, if you've got a 30-year mortgage, you're 26% chance of having at least one, if not more, floods during the term of that mortgage, if that structure is located in that high risk zone. Stacy talked a little bit earlier, those high risk zones are delineated on the flood maps by the letter A here in Colorado. They're also the blue areas, or the blue and red hatched areas, although that's the floodway. There's no difference in insurance for structures that are located in the floodway, but they are one of the higher risks because that actually carries the 1% flood. But what's really happening across this country, as you have seen really over the last year, we had, how many storms did we have? How many fires did we have? We were, you know, we've been in a drought, and we're probably going to be in a drought this year. So, you know, but our storms are becoming more frequent. They are becoming more severe, and we're seeing more and more floods occur both inside and outside of that high risk area. So, you know, when we have good data, when we have good information, it improves life safety. And that is the purpose of the National Flood Insurance Program, and allows everyone to make informed decisions on how they could protect their most valuable responsibilities. That is their home and or their business. Next slide, please. So what is the National Flood Insurance Program? It is a federal program that is administered by FEMA, but it's a voluntary program for communities to participate in the NFIP. And when they do that, then flood insurance through the federal government is made available to property owners within that community. We have a little over 22,000 communities in the NFIP across the country. One of the things that Congress does, and our program is guided by Congress, is many years ago, about 45 years ago, after a series of severe storms, Congress said, well, why don't we have more insurance in effect? We've had this program out there for 5 or 6 years. Why don't we have more policies? So they passed law and subsequently enforced that through several other pieces of legislation that says anytime you have a federal loan through a regulated lending institution or a federal agency, flood insurance is required. And I'll talk more about in a minute. What the communities have to do to join the program is to regulate development within those high risk areas to make sure that those structures, or the lowest floor of those structures, are at lower risk for flooding. Now, I didn't say at no risk because they are still at risk for events that are higher than what we have anticipated through our mapping. And that's where our severe storms and climate change is coming in. So communities must participate in the National Flood Insurance Program in order for flood insurance to be purchased by residents and building owners, as well as to make disaster assistance available to people who don't have flood insurance when they suffer a flood event. Next slide, please. So when is flood insurance required? As I said, anytime you make, increase, renew, or extend a loan on a structure located or to be located in one of those high-risk areas, one of those A zones, or one of those blue areas on the flood map, they are required to obtain and maintain flood insurance for the life of that loan. Our insurance rates are based on the current effective flood map, just like the mandatory purchase is. They have to look at what the current maps that are effective are. So these maps that are coming in the latter part of 2022 are not going to be affected by you having to have flood insurance or the cost of your flood insurance right now. That's going to come down. But what we want to portray to you right now is you are at risk. Even though those maps aren't effective, our studies show that those people that are going into the special flood hazard areas are at risk. Unfortunately, there are some people who are coming out of the floodplain, but we can't change those until those maps go effective. There is a 30-day wait period in most cases to put flood insurance in effect. And that's to prevent people to see water coming down the stream, go out, call their insurance agent, say, I want to buy flood insurance, so that you have flood insurance tomorrow when it floods. That's not going to happen. So we usually have a 30-day wait period. The couple of exceptions are when you do a mortgage transaction or a loan transaction on a structure, we have a 1-day wait. I mean, there is no wait period on that. It's effective as of the date and time of that closing when you become owner of that property. The second one is what actually we're talking about today, is there's a map change. And the law says we can waive that 30-day wait period and change it to a 1-day if you're moved into a special flood hazard area, or you want to buy flood insurance before that map goes effective, or after that map goes effective, sorry, then there is only a 1-day wait period for that. The third exception is not something that we relatively see here in Denver, but we see it in the surrounding counties, and that is wildfire. When there's a wildfire, there is a substantial increase in the risk for flooding down the mountain because the water can't be absorbed when the rains come. So we have the ability to change a 30-day wait period under certain conditions. Next slide, please. So what factors do we currently use to change or to charge premiums for the National Flood Insurance Program? What flood zone are you in? Low to moderate risk, you can have a preferred risk that runs anywhere from, 550, 600 to 850, depending on whether or not you've got a basement. You've got a basement, you've got an indoor swimming pool in your home because the water's going to seek its lowest point. How high is that structure? How high is it above the base flood, which is what we term to be the level of water that's going to be reached during that design storm. So that elevation difference, the higher you go, the lower the premium, the lower you go, the higher the premium. So for those structures that were built long ago, or before there were any rules on how structures needed to be built, those might carry a little bit higher because they could be built anyway. Those structures that are built to certain codes that the community has to enforce, they're going to have a little lower premium. The loss history, does it have or has it had several flood insurance claims? course, the deductible as your homeowner's policy, as well as how much coverage you have. Now, you through the National Flood Insurance Program, and we really don't care who you write your coverage through. It can be through the federal program or it can be through a private market. We just want you to be aware of the risk and to protect that risk. But through the National Flood Insurance Program, the most Congress will allow us to write is for a residential structure, 250,000 on the building and 100,000 on contents. For non-residential and other residential, that's 500,000 building and 500,000 in contents. Now you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I live in Denver, that's not enough to cover my home. There are other markets. One is the private, the other is what we call excess flood, where you can get more coverage should you want to do that. So talk to your insurance agent to be sure that one, you know what your risk is, two, what kind of rate you can have, three, to protect your property and keep it from harm's way. Next slide, please. So what are my insurance options? Everybody's asking that question. What's it going to cost me? If you are not in the special flood hazard areas right now, even though you might be going in, or even though you might not be going in, the risk for flooding at some level is there. Sudden downpours, cloud bursts, things like that can, storm drains can back up. You're at risk for flooding. There's a preferred risk rating policy. That's that $550 to $700-ish a premium annually if you live outside the special flood hazard area. For those properties, when you look at the viewer that James is going to show you in a few minutes, you see those areas that are going, you're not in now, but you're going into the special flood hazard area. Preferred risk is a good way to lock in that flood zone right now. But once it's moved into that high risk area, when those maps go effective towards the end of 2022, you go into what we call a newly mapped rating structure. And that's to account for the higher risk. You're in a high risk now, not a low to moderate risk. So we've got to account for that increase in risk, but we're on a slow glide path to do that. So the premiums might increase about 15 to 18% on an annual basis. Then we have our grandfather rule. If you, very similar to the newly mapped, is you buy the policy now, you grandfather the flood zone, then we'll honor that flood zone, in the future. If your structure was built to a certain code by the community and that code or that elevation changes up, we will honor that lower elevation and give you the better premium. Now, I do have to tell you that over the next couple of years, we are changing our rating structure for the National Flood Insurance Program. It may hurt, it may help these rating options. We won't know more about it until later in the summer. This year, it's supposed to go into effect towards the end of 2021. That's the plan right now. We'll just have to wait and see if that happens. Next slide, please. So there's 4 things that can happen during this map revision that might affect your insurance rates. You go into the high risk area. We call that into the newly mapped area. Or the newly mapped area takes you out of the floodplain. That's a good one. That means the risk is lower, not gone, but lower. And we can compensate, or we can change your premiums for that activity, that lower risk. There may be no change. Nothing is changing from your current flood zone on the future map. But it's a good time to review, one, do you even have flood insurance? If you don't, it's a good time to talk to your insurance agent about that risk and how you can protect your most valuable asset that you have. We also have that change in base flood elevation. Base flood elevation means the water's going to get deeper. You're at higher risk, okay? Buy the policy before that change so that we can kind of grandfather that lower flood lower base flood elevation, or maybe the base flood elevation is going down, and we can change the cost of your flood insurance for that. So talk to your insurance agent, talk to your carrier, get your risk, find out how to protect that risk. What's the best rating option that you have? Next. So I'm going to talk to Chris, and she's going to talk about how to appeal the map or what you can do as a property owner.
James, were you trying to say something?
No, I'm so sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. I just want to know. Thank you, Diana. My name is Chris. I am with Fema, and I'm the mapping lead for the state of Colorado. And tonight I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the appeals process and the letter of map change process. Fema does have procedures for reevaluating the maps. We do run a statutory 90-day appeal period for our mapping projects, and we're looking to start the appeal period for this project this summer. Next slide, please. An appeal must be based on mathematical or measurement errors, natural changes in physical conditions, or incorrect data or methodology. The error must be identified, and supporting technical data is required to correct the error or to demonstrate how and or why the methodology is incorrect. The data must be submitted within the 90-day appeal period, and the appeal must also be submitted through and supported by the community. Next slide, please. Fema also has the letter of map change process where a property can be removed from the special flood hazard area. It's based on the elevation of the residential structure or your home and the adjacent grade relative to the base flood elevation. And it does require an elevation certificate by a licensed engineer or land surveyor. It is an official amendment to an effective firm, and with one, property owners may avoid the mandatory flood insurance requirements. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have right now. James, are there any in the chat?
There have been a couple, but I think we'll probably just table those till the end, and some are specific about some letter of map change and other amendments. So we'll field those at the end once we get past this. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So our role at the City and County of Denver, the Floodplain Management Group, our role is really to use these new maps or any of the published maps to make sure the development is done in a safe and resilient way. And before we get too far into that, I need to just explain the definition between some of the portions of the high risk zone. This is important because it will dictate what can and can't be done in those portions of the high risk zone. So the floodway is part of the AE's zone that needs to be reserved to pass a flood and minimize damage to other people and other properties. So this is really important because it's the most dangerous part of the high risk zone, and it's typically subject to fast or deep water, higher erosion potential, and potential for debris. And as such, it has the most restrictive construction requirements. Now, the flood fringe is the area of the AE high risk zone that is outside of the floodway. There are significant construction requirements there, a little more lenient than the floodway, but certainly some requirements that need to be met in order to ensure that that development is safe. And the same goes for the flood storage area. These are the other A zones. AO is pretty applicable in some of these areas. A and AH are less common here. And that also has significant construction requirements associated with that. Next slide, please. So again, our role here is to make sure that any construction in these high-risk zones are safe. We require any permit of a floodplain development permit for any construction in these high-risk zones. We do want to make sure that people are developing in a safe manner, and we want to make sure that we're conveying the flood capacity of that particular drainage way. So, for example, we can't allow people to put a fence across a drainage way because that impacts how water moves and potentially adversely impacts other people, makes the flooding worse for them. So there's a little flow chart here. This will be up for on the website as well for reference. But really any construction in a high risk zone requires a permit. Those moderate and low risk zones that Stacy talked about earlier, those do not require special floodplain permits, but the high risk zones do. And there's more leniency in the flood fringe and flood storage areas. We do allow new construction, new buildings, for example, fences, fill, that kind of thing. But the floodway, because it's so dangerous, is really where the major restrictions are. We do not allow new structures, new buildings in the floodway because they're basically at the highest risk of being destroyed in a flood event. So next slide, please. And it's kind of summarizing what Diana was talking about earlier and what I just covered. Here's a little table. I won't go through this whole thing. Again, the slides will be up on the website. This generally speaks to the different scenarios for different folks, whether you're mapped in or out, or remain in a high-risk zone, et cetera. And then the implications to whether or not flood insurance is required, what happens with the flood insurance rates typically, and the regulatory requirements here. So if, for example, you're not in a high-risk zone today and you're mapped into a high-risk zone, flood insurance is required by your lender, your insurance rates will go up or they will start to go up as time goes on, and you'll be required to get permits for work on that property. One thing to note here is that, and I think Diana mentioned this earlier, that being mapped in the floodway or if you're already in the floodway, that change doesn't actually change the rates. But the floodway is more about the construction regulations. Next slide, please. So how do you reduce your risk, right? The first step is really understanding the flood risk. So reviewing these maps, looking at the map tools that have been provided for your use, and really understanding what your current flood risk is and asking questions. So, we want you to know what your options are, talking to your insurance agent about options, depending on the specifics of your situation, whether you're being mapped in or out or whatever the case may be. We really want you to be informed about your flood insurance options and also understand the details of that policy, such as, what the deductibles and premiums are, what it covers, what it doesn't cover, et cetera. And then, of course, talk to the folks at the City of Denver. Our team is very knowledgeable about this stuff. And so we can talk to you about what those building requirements look like and how to, more information about those rules and regulations. And then also we can provide guidance about how to reduce your flood risk. So there's some simple things that can be done. They range from, free, such as, moving valuables, family photos and that thing out of basements, the first place that typically gets flooded, moving those to a higher level so you don't lose those family heirlooms and that kind of stuff, to anything, elevating a building in place is an extreme example of another way that you can mitigate your flood risk, but those have high costs associated with those. And of course, we want citizens to be prepared. So having this information And knowing your flood risk allows you to prepare accordingly. Purchasing flood insurance, for example, is a good way to be prepared. It won't stop the flood from occurring, but it certainly will reduce your financial liability and get you back on your feet a little quicker if you were to incur damage during a flood. And one of the other more important things is, developing a plan, an emergency plan in the case of a flood. So build an emergency kit, develop a plan for you and your family, or if you own a business, for your employees, and communicate that plan and practice it. This website, ready.gov, is a really good resource and has checklists for things to include in a kit, and also ways to prepare an emergency action plan. Next slide, please. And this last slide here is really just a resources slide, some contact information. denvergov.org/flood is a great resource to find out more information about the regulations and to find your flood risk. And also just reaching out to us directly using floodplain at denvergov.org or the number listed. If you have specific questions to flood insurance, visiting floodsmart.gov and talking to your insurance agent is really one of the most important things to understand your options. And if you still have questions, there's a call center with experts that can help answer questions there. And then lastly, if you have questions specific to this process, we have the project website here, 2018-PMR, and Stacy is a resource as well to email or call her with any specific questions. So with that, again, these slides will be up on the website shortly. So this resource that will be available to you and those links will be available to you. So I'm going to send it over to James, and he's going to walk through the preliminary map viewer. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry, James Johnson. Real quick before we switch over to you, I just wanted to say real quick, thanks to everyone for dropping your questions in the chat box. Please continue to do so. And again, after James Johnson has a chance to walk us through the platform, we will go back through and revisit any of those questions that we may still have. So thank you all.
Okay, thanks, James Cullen. I am James Johnston. Let's see, we're gonna share my screen. I didn't have the camera on. I was having some difficulties before, so hello. Now I'm gonna switch to sharing my screen. Okay, sharing my screen. How about that one? Okay, not that, not that. There we go. Okay, so I am going to, if I can move this out of the way. I had lost my multiple screens. I'm down on the one screen, so you guys are gonna, is there a way to get rid of this thing? There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So real quick, I'm gonna walk you through the website. The link is on the slide deck there. And will take you directly to, when you click on it, it's going to open up just like what you see here on my screen. James, can you confirm we can see my screen? Am I sharing the right thing?
Yes, sir. I see it, but it still has the 2018 fiscal map review.
Okay, that's perfect then. Yeah, when you open the website, you're going to have this landing screen here, which has some basic information about the Mile High Flood District, Denver and Jefferson County tool, and you can basically, you see a lot of the community information in here as you can scroll this thing up and down. And I guess you can say you agree to the terms and conditions in order to use it, and then you'll be able to click OK. Once you've done that, you'll be looking at, you've got this ribbon here. And this ribbon has some basic functionality on it, some zoom in and zoom out, sort of standard web mapping type options, a navigation tool here where you can actually put in an address, which is very helpful, and we'll test that out in a minute. And then you'll notice that the layer list, so you see the icon up here, is the layer list icon, and that's turned on down here. So that's because that's on. So if I click on that, it goes away. If I click it back on, it comes back. And this shows you all the features in the map that are currently turned on and available for you to browse. So you have the cross sections, profile baselines, which are your stream center lines, panels, which is turned off, but if you want to compare and find the panel that you're on, you could click on that, turn those on, and then find out the panel number, and you can download the panel from the MSC site that we looked at earlier. And then the sort of the crux of the viewer is this changes since last firm layer here. And it's going to show you in these colors the increase change. So if a floodplain has increased from the prior footprint, the decrease if it's gotten smaller, and then the no change is in a blue here. And then the preliminary firm, which you can turn on and see the basic features of the firm. These are the same features that are on your maps. So the floodway, SFHA, and the 0.2% chance. Yes.
Real quick, we did have a question about some of the various layers and what they mean. Do you mind just giving a kind of a brief explanation, or is that what you were getting into? I apologize.
No, that's fine. I'm going to walk through these layers and what they mean. So I'll just maybe turn one on real quick and we can zoom in. We're kind of blocked here because I was still showing you the ribbon, but if you want to get the ribbon out of the way, I'm on a very small screen as well, so I don't have the same real estate that I had on a larger screen. But if you click this, you can kind of get that ribbon out of the way. And to navigate, it's as easy as clicking on your mouse, and you can drag around. And then actually, I just want to zoom to a specific spot. So let me get to those in just a second. The layers, we'll come back to that once we zoom in. How about that? Because I just want to show you the tools that you have on the ribbon. And of course, you don't need to write all this down or memorize all this. If you get stuck on any of these things, you can always reach out and we'll be able to answer any questions. Along with the layer list, you also have a legend list. Okay, so the legend is different than the layers because you'll notice here in the legend, I can't turn anything on or off, but when I click on another layer here, it shows up in the legend. So the legend is just showing you what's visible, and the layer list is showing you all the available data that you have in the tool that you can play with. Okay, so let me close that. There's also printing function if you want to connect to a printer. If whatever printer you're connected to, once you have a view set up, you can hit print. Info is just the like another splash screen that's going to give you some additional resource links. And these are the links back to the pages that we've been referring to throughout the presentation. This is another splash screen of contacts. So if you need to send an email to Jeremy, there's his email right there. Or you can call him, whatever. And timeline, this is also another splash screen of information, just showing you the overall timeline of the project. And then this neat one here that we'll go right and actually use is the Bookmark Tool. And so we've got some bookmarks already set here that look at the different elements of the study. So there are different areas that were studied as part of this project. So if I click on the Sanderson Gulch area, it'll take me down, let's say I was zoomed out like so, go to Harvard Gulch and back over to Sanderson Gulch. So that's kind of handy. And then once you're in there, you can start to, let's just I'll just zoom in on Sanderson and I'll take a look at some of the data here and maybe answer that question about what these layers are. I'll turn on the cross sections first. Let me turn off the changes and turn on our preliminary floodplain. So if you were looking at this panel, which the viewer, when I click, I've turned on panels. And now if I click on this map, it's going to tell me everything that's underneath where I clicked has information, and that information is going to show up in this window. And so now I know that I'm on panel 191. So if I had that panel downloaded, 191, from the MSC, I could look at this area and I would see in slightly different colors the same information that I'm seeing here. I would see a floodway. Remember, we have our symbology over here. In fact, maybe that's where this comes in handy. Floodway in this, I hope it's pink. I'm kind of colorblind, so if I say something backwards, let me know. It's pinkish to me. This is the blue is the special flood hazard area, so that's in addition to the floodway. And then this is the outside fringe 0.2%, 500 year beyond that. So I would see these same 3 zones lined up here, floodway, SFHA, 0.2%, and then I would see these cross sections, and these cross sections are listing the elevation value at that mapped location. What else can I see here? I can see the name, of course, of Sanderson Gulch, which is on this profile baseline feature. If I turn that off, there goes that line. So you see how that line lines up with the center of the stream. Okay. And then let's use this. I have an address here. I'm just gonna paste in, hopefully. I won't test this out. This is a geocoding application. It's gonna go to any address that you plug in here. So you do wanna plug one in that's in the area, because this is a large globe here that we're looking at. And if you can zoom out pretty far, but you can go ahead and put in an address, and there it is. It comes up, this Denver, William Street, Denver. And it's showing, when we look at the changes since last firm at this location, turn off the prelim data. Let's turn off the cross sections too, because those get a little busy. So now, looking at that, see there's our dot there where we had the address. That's our 2431 South Williams. And we're in an area that there has been a floodplain decrease. And so all of this yellow area has changed from the previous firm to the current firm in a decrease. And in an increase, we have additional increase of some flooding that's gone out over the road here onto East Wesley. One thing we can do if we want to look at both, let's say we want to look at the, I didn't show you this last layer, but this is a neat one too. The effective data, that's the data that's currently effective. It's in there too. So that's loaded up. So this is what the effective original current, sorry, not original, I'm sure it's changed, the current floodplain. And then I can turn on our preliminary floodplain. And then this tool here is called the swipe tool. And when I click on that, it's going to let me swipe between the underlying layers. So on the right over here, I can see the effective data. And on the left over here, I can see the preliminary data. That's the new mapping. And if I move this left and right, you can see one goes away and one comes back. So like if I go to the right, I'm pulling the new data over the old data, or the current effective data. And you can do that with, if you change between layers, let's say changes since last firm, and the swipe layer, you can control which layer you're swiping. So if I want to swipe my preliminary firm layer, then it's going to go away and the changes shows up underneath. So just a fun little thing to play with. I like it with preliminary versus effective because you can really see the change kind of quickly. One other, yep.
Let me add in here. You have to be very careful with this tool. If you could swipe back to the right,
Mm-hmm.
you will see that a lot of the flooding is located in the street, but may just come up on the curb. Be very careful with that. It may be that the mandatory purchase is still going to apply because part of the floodplain, that blue area, is located in the high-risk area, and the mortgage company may still require flood insurance because there is floodplain on the property. It may not be on the structure. So be very careful with that. You also have to look at where the blue area crosses a structure. That may also trigger being in the having mandatory purchase. If any part of the building is in the floodplain, the whole building is in, and the mandatory purchase requirement will apply.
Yes, good point. It's always good to look a little bit beyond the boundaries that we see here.
Right, and there's not a magical line in the floodplain that says it stops here and over here it's not and over here it is. You know, it is in the floodplain, and it's as close as we can get to the risk, but the risk is still there. Just because you're on one side of the line as the other doesn't change the risk.
Great. Okay, I think, let's see, this showed you the swipe tool. Turn that off, I believe. Or does it not ever want to go away? Let me see. Swipe. There we go. Nope, still there. One other thing I wanted to show you is that in this layer list, we have some other functions that are also kind of fun to play with. So if you click on this ellipse here next to each layer in the layer list, you see this little ellipse, these 3 dots. If you click on that, it opens up another menu. And so one thing that is helpful is the transparency. Right now, I can see through these floodplains to the image underneath. But if I want, I can make that even more transparent. So I can really, adjust this so that it is allowing me to see what I want to see, or the way that is most helpful for me to see the data. So that transparency is a nice one. You can also disable the pop-up. The pop-up is this function here where if I click, I'm going to get a pop-up. So I can disable that if I don't want to see this data information come up when I click on something. Move up, move down is a way to adjust items within this list. So if I want preliminary to move one up, then it'll move. I think I just moved it, or maybe it didn't. Anyway, those are the basic functions that you've got in there. Zoom to allows you to zoom to the entire layer. And since I did that, I lost what I was looking at. So we'll go back in. Also, it's not a specific function here, but if you have a mouse wheel, like what I do right here, this mouse wheel thing, you can control the zoom that way as well. So you've got a basic pan functionality, which is the default. Anytime you click, left click and just drag, you're going to pan around, and then you can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. So pretty standard for most mapping applications, but if you're not familiar with them, a couple of tricks there.
And now, James, real quick, we did get a question about flood zones and insurance requirements. Can we kind of sit at this screen for just a moment and give Diana maybe just a minute to explain the various colors that we see here and which zones have mandatory purchase requirements.
So anything that is in blue and red is the high-risk flood area for insurance purposes. And flood insurance will be required if there is a federal mortgage on that property. Easier said than that, you know?
And if there are any follow-up questions, please throw those in the chat and we will be sure to address those as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diana.
And it's worth noting that this particular one is the preliminary map, so those won't go into effect until fall 2022. The current insurance requirements are based on the effective map, which is this one. And in this view, the dark blue and the light blue, I guess the medium
Darker,
blue
yeah.
and the dark blue are the areas that require flood insurance currently.
Floodplain, yeah, the high-risk areas.
And if you turn this on, you can see where those changes are. It's going to be
So
some,
they're spiking into the roads. Looks like on the north side. I'm assuming north is up.
yes.
Okay. But you also see some yellow in there, and that yellow means that the floodplain is reducing. So there's something that has gone on to cause that floodplain to reduce, and that could change to the good for those structures that used to be in the floodplain and now they're not. But the risk is still there. So as you can see, you've got blue on both sides of the of that area in the upper right-hand corner. So the risk is higher, whether it's denoted in the floodplain or not. The risk is higher. So you need to be concerned about, okay, what is my true flood risk?
So I think unless there's additional questions in the chat on the tool itself, I don't have much else to show with the tool. I think we've covered the basic functionality. Is there anything else in the chat or other questions that we should cover on how to use this tool?
Yeah, James, Tyler had a question about, again, going back to the mandatory purchase, and it does seem that he does have a mortgage on his home. So would you like to explain how kind of the relationship between a mortgage and insurance requirements?
So as I said earlier, anytime you have a federal mortgage, making structure, a mortgage company through a regulated lending institution, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, or federal agency, FHA, VA, the law requires flood insurance on structures located in those high-risk areas, okay? Now, for those that are going into the floodplain, you've got another year or a year and a half to where that mandatory purchase is there, but your risk is there right now. So you need to look at that risk, and you also need to be able to get the lowest rate possible that you can by purchasing that flood insurance right now. So, and in the yellow area, if you're in that yellow area and your structure is, or your property is not in blue at all in the change, you'll have to wait till that map goes effective before we can reduce the cost of flood insurance in those areas. So those are those areas in gold where none of the floodplain is on the property. Can a LOMA be conducted at any point in time, or is there a point where the map is no longer subject? Well, you can do a letter, you can look at the eligibility for a letter of map amendment if you're located in a special flood hazard area now. And, you know, our maps, because of the scale, do not take into consider those little anomalies that are in the ground. So it may by chance, the structure in the middle of that blue area may be on one of those anomalies. And if the ground's higher than the base flood, yeah, you can apply for a letter of map amendment. Is that going to stick for the map revision? Well, we'll have to look at that and see, has any of the data changed that would take away that letter of map amendment? But we don't do letters of map change, letters of map amendment, usually until 30 days before the map goes effective or after, if it's even eligible.
Yeah, and Diana, who initiates those? And is that the homeowner, the business owner, the city?
Most usually it's done by the homeowners. They'll contact a surveyor so that they could come out and do an elevation certificate. And we or the city can definitely review that elevation certificate just to see if they're eligible. It's a 50-50 chance. We can't guarantee it.
Hey, if I could chime in here.
Yeah.
This is complex stuff, and we really, if anybody's considering a LOMA,
Talk to the city.
yeah, talk to us, email us with your address, and we can look at those site-specific conditions and provide guidance as to what your best course of action is. For some folks, doing a LOMA right now may be really beneficial because for various reasons.
Take you out of the floodplain right now.
Right, and it may carry through the map change. In other cases, it might not be advantageous to do it right now, and we certainly don't want people throwing money away if that LOMA isn't going to be beneficial, and you can wait until later and until those new maps become effective is when that LOMA may be beneficial. So just reach out to us, please, and we can help you there. It's definitely varies case by case. So thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I did want to ask one more question that I saw earlier in the chat, and I can't seem to find it at this point, but someone was asking about basements and whether they're covered. Can you explain a little bit more about that, Diana, please?
Sure. Through whether or not it's through let me restate that. Through the National Flood Insurance Program, we have very limited coverage in the basement. We do not generally cover contents that are located in a basement that is damaged as a result of flood. With that being said, we do cover three things. We cover a freezer and the food in them. We cover a washer and dryer, and we cover a portable air conditioner as long as it is in position and plugged in and able to work. When it comes to building elements, we cover what is essential for the habitability. So we'll cover the hot water heater, we'll cover a furnace, we'll cover the, part of your air conditioner that's down there. I know I have a basement in my townhome, we will put in sheetrock, but we will not tape, finish, or texture it. We will put insulation in, but that's it. So in the flood insurance policy for building the items, there are only 17 things that we cover: electrical, plumbing, things like that affect the habitability of the structure. Okay. The big thing is we do not cover contents except those three items. So Jeremy talked earlier about, if we know that a flood is coming, although sometimes in Denver, we don't have that luxury. Flash flooding is very prominent here. You may have to hurry and move as much as you can upstairs because what is left down there will not be covered.
And real quick, I'm going to ask James Johnson to stop sharing his screen. I'm going to throw a slide back up that has some contact information, phone numbers, email addresses for us to look at as we're finishing this. So as soon as
My contact information in the chat room.
Great. And then there was one more kind of follow-up question to one of those earlier about when LOMAs are going to be evaluated. When existing LOMAs will be evaluated.
So, Chris, do you want to take that one? I mean, I can, but you can, the SOMA, the summary of map action.
Go ahead, Diana. Thank you.
Okay. So what we do is before we do the letter of final determination and that's 6 months before the map goes effective. So prior to that, we will take all existing letters of map change that are out there and we will compare them to the map revision that is coming up to see whether or not they are still valid, and we will revalidate those. We will not issue a new LOMA, but we will revalidate that, and the summary of map action will reflect that. We will incorporate any letters of map revision that need to be incorporated into the final map. Or we will, I'm trying to think of a word, we will invalidate those that don't meet the new map's requirements. For instance, if the base flood elevation is going up, that letter of map amendment will not be valid anymore because the conditions have changed. Now, keep in mind, this all is predicated on our new rating structure. It may not mean anything in the future with regards to letters of map change for insurance purposes. For the cost of insurance. It will still apply for floodplain management and it will still apply for the mandatory purchase.
Thank you, Diana. We had one more follow-up question regarding a few of the different maps that we've seen tonight, and whether one is more accurate than the other, or you know, sometimes it looks like some of not the topography, I'm sorry, the satellite imagery might be skewed one way or the other. Can you address some of that, perhaps?
You want me to address that, or
well, that actually might be more for Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say either Chris or one of the contractors.
This is Jeremy. I can chime in on this. This map viewer is the best available data right now. The other map on Mile High Flood District's site that Kyle provided a link to, it's generally it's the same data and may have a different background aerial imagery. But that one doesn't have some of these other floodway boundaries and things of that nature. So I would suggest using this changes since last firm tool. We do see situations where, especially when the flood zone, the high risk zone is very close to the house, depending on which aerial imagery you use, it could be in, it could be out. And that's typically when a LOMA is necessary to really get the survey data required to show whether or not the house is high enough compared to the flood elevation. So the answer is we recommend that you use this website that we're showing tonight. And if it's sort of too close to call, so to speak, reach out to the city and we will certainly help you through that, because they get tricky depending on how close you are to the high risk zone.
Great, thank you. And there was a question about crawl spaces, and I just wanted to confirm that we had potentially answered the question that was asked.
What was the question about a crawl space?
I believe, and again, it's lost in the chat at this point. Give me just one moment.
It was a question about the coverages and whether or not crawl spaces are treated the same as a basement. So if you could speak to that, Diana.
So if the floor of the crawl space is below the grade, exterior grade next to the crawl space by more than 2 feet, yes, it is considered a basement. So we call that a subgrade basement based on the current rating structure. Now, future rating may not take that crawl space into effect. But if you've got machinery and equipment in that crawl space, you might want to think about doing a mitigation action to elevate that. Because in our new rating structure, we'll give you some credits for doing that if there's no machinery and equipment in there. Just a hint.
And if I could speak to another question that came up in the chat, about one of the questions was, if we're willing to pay flood insurance, why aren't we able to develop our property? And I guess I'd just say that, you know, flood insurance, it's more of a public safety issue. Flood insurance doesn't prevent flooding in any way. It does help you recover from the flood, but the development restrictions are really there because there's public safety hazards. So the city has an obligation to ensure that the property owner and any future property owners, that anything they do in terms of construction in those flood zones is safe, is resilient, and doesn't impact others. So
Yeah,
there's,
and
you sort of have
that's
to
what it's-
sever the, you have to sever those two.
Surrounding, yeah, any surrounding property owners don't suffer damage.
Right. So, you know, we really have to, from a regulatory standpoint, we need to sever the regulations from the flood insurance.
So there was a great question that came up right as you were trying to do that Jeremy might want to address in the chat room.
Say that again, Diana, please.
So there was a question in the chat room about, say, if I'm going into the floodplain, I can't develop my property.
Not necessarily. So it really depends on whether you're in the floodway or the flood fringe area. And if you're in the floodway, there are more significant restrictions. If you're in the flood fringe area, there are restrictions, and there are definitely ways that properties can be developed safely. We actually see that quite a bit in these basins where redevelopment is occurring. And, you know, the house has to be set up a little bit in order to be protected from flooding, or some other mitigation measures to do that. So Phil, if you would reach out to us at floodplain@denvergov.org with your address, we can start to talk more details about what is and isn't allowed there.
Yeah, if I may, you know, just go on that. It's not that you can't develop, it's you have to develop safely so that you're safe and what the development that you're doing does not cause harm to the surrounding areas. So that's essentially the premise behind floodplain management and what communities Jeremy and his group do on a day-to-day basis.
All right, well, at this point, I think I will ask the panelists to go ahead and stick around for just a few more moments. Thank you for everyone for attending this meeting and for being engaging and asking us these great questions. And again, we are going to be posting this on the website, and we will have some Spanish closed captioning. So if you have any questions between now and then, please feel free to reach out. Again, we have a number of different ways to contact us, so please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to answer any questions that you do have. And thank you to all the panelists for answering these questions and for delivering the presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm seeing quite a few people drop, and I haven't seen any additional questions come through. So again, thanks everyone. I think I'll go ahead and close the meeting for the evening. But again, reach out with any questions. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.